You know that little moment after you flush a toilet, or toss a shirt into the laundry, or tie your shoes and walk out the door, when the dirty part of life just disappears? Now take that feeling and drop it into an ancient city before sunrise. You step into a Roman street while the stones are still damp. A bakery is heating its oven. A donkey is pulling a cart. Somebody upstairs dumps a chamber pot into a drain. And beside the road, there are jars set out for men to pee in, because that urine is not trash. It is tomorrow's laundry detergent. That is the world this story starts in. Not a world where people were too primitive to notice filth. A world where filth was useful. And the deeper you follow it, the stranger it gets, because some of the most disgusting jobs in ancient history were the jobs that made civilization look clean. Start with the Roman fuller. At Pompeii, archaeologists found workshops called Fulonicae, including the famous Fulonica of Stephanus, with vats built into the floor. This was where cloth was cleaned, whitened, thickened, and finished. But the worker was not standing beside a neat basin of soap. He could be standing inside a tub of fabric soaked with stale human urine, stomping it with his bare feet. It sounds like punishment, but it was chemistry. Urine contains urea, and as it ages, urea breaks down into ammonia. Ammonia cuts through grease, sweat, and oil. So a Roman tunic might become cleaner because somebody spent his morning trampling it in yesterday's latrine smell. The Romans understood the value well enough that urine collection became taxable. The Emperor Vespasian famously taxed it in the 1st century, and later writers said that when his son objected, Vespasian held up a coin and pointed out that money does not smell. Whether the line was polished in the retelling or not, the point was real. Waste had entered the economy. The disgusting part was not a side effect. It was the tool. And once you see that, the ancient city changes shape. The clean white garment in the forum depended on the reeking jar in the alley. The respectable citizen depended on the worker whose job made him smell unacceptable. But laundry was only the mild beginning. Leather was worse because leather starts as a problem nobody wants to touch. A fresh hide is not a belt or a sandal. It is a wet sheet of animal skin with blood, fat, hair, scraps of flesh, and bacteria already racing to turn it into rot. The tanner's job was to stop that collapse at exactly the right moment. First, the hide had to be scraped. Then the hair had to be loosened, often with lime or urine. In many tanning traditions, dung was used because enzymes in manure helped break down unwanted material and soften the hide. Dog dung became especially prized in some later processes, which tells you the general direction of the smell. Picture the yard at the edge of town. Pits cut into the ground, hides swelling in liquid, men pulling heavy skins out of vats and scraping them over beams, while the air carries ammonia, feces, old blood, and wet animal hair. The finished product could be elegant: sandals, armor straps, water skins, book covers, harnesses. But the making of it was so foul that tanners, dyers, and similar trades were often pushed toward the margins of cities. Not because their work was minor, but because it was too necessary to avoid and too disgusting to live beside. That pattern is one of the biggest clues. Ancient societies did not simply ignore filth. They assigned it. They gave some people the job of crossing the boundary so everyone else could pretend the boundary held. And no boundary mattered more than human waste. Rome had public latrines, drains, private toilets in some wealthy houses, and the great Cloaca Maxima, a sewer system that became almost legendary. But a sewer is not magic. It is a tunnel that has to keep working. It can clog, it can flood, it can trap gases, it can push the city back into people's homes. Someone had to go down there. Imagine entering a dark drain with a lamp, stepping over slick stone, not knowing whether the next pocket of air will make you cough, faint, or die. Modern science gives names to the dangers: methane, hydrogen sulfide, low oxygen. Ancient workers did not need the names. They knew some pits killed. Outside the grand sewer districts, the work was more direct. Latrine pits filled. Chamber pots had to be carried. Human waste could be moved to fields as fertilizer, which made practical sense because it returned nutrients to soil. It also meant handling parasites, disease, and the most intimate evidence of a whole neighborhood. The cleaner the courtyard looked in the morning, the more likely someone had spent the night carrying away what the household did not want to see. Then comes one of the strangest reversals in the ancient world, because one of the worst smells produced one of the most prestigious colors. Tyrian purple, the color of kings and emperors, came from sea snails. In the eastern Mediterranean, especially around Phoenician centers like Tyre and Sidon, workers processed species such as Balinus brandaris and Hexaplex trunculus. The dye came from a small gland inside the animal. One snail gave almost nothing, so workshops needed staggering numbers of them. Archaeological sites near ancient dyeing centers have produced heaps of crushed shells, the kind of industrial trash pile that tells you luxury was built on mass death at the shoreline. The snails were broken open, the glands removed or processed, and the material was left in vats to develop. Sunlight and oxygen helped transform the chemical compounds into colors that could range from blue to reddish purple. But before it became imperial fabric, it was decomposing shellfish. Ancient writers complained about the smell, and modern experiments with murex dyeing make it easy to understand why. It is not just fishy, it is marine rot with a chemical bite. So when a Roman senator displayed a purple stripe on his toga, the public saw status. Hidden behind that little band of color were piles of dead snails, stained hands, and workshops nobody wanted upwind. Food could work the same way. Roman garum, the famous fermented fish sauce, was prized across the empire. In Pompeii, one producer, Aulus Umbricius Scaurus, was successful enough that fish sauce amphorae were represented in mosaics in his house. This was not some obscure back-alley condiment. It was a major product shipped in jars, labeled, traded, and judged by quality. The recipe sounds like something going wrong until you understand it. Fish, or fish guts, were layered with salt and left to ferment, often in warm coastal conditions. The salt kept ordinary putrefaction from simply ruining the batch, while enzymes broke the fish into a concentrated savory liquid. If you have tasted anchovy paste, Worcestershire sauce, or certain fermented Asian fish sauces, you already know the basic trick. Controlled decay can become flavor. But now, imagine being the person who tended the vats. The sun is hot. The mixture is alive with smell. Your job is to manage the border between food and rot so precisely that rich households will pay for the result. That is the recurring ancient bargain. The worker absorbs the sensory horror so the customer receives refinement. And then there were the people who touched the one thing more feared than waste: the dead. In ancient Egypt, embalmers performed some of the most skilled and uncomfortable work in the world. Mummification was sacred, technical, expensive, and physical. The body was washed, organs were removed, the corpse was dried with natron, a natural salt mixture. Resins, oils, linen, amulets, and ritual words turned a dead person into a preserved body that could endure for centuries or even millennia. But the worker had to do what the grieving family could not. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described Egyptian embalming and included a detail that feels psychologically sharp even if we treat the whole account carefully. He says the person who made the incision in the corpse was chased or pelted afterward, as if the community needed the cut, but also needed to condemn the cutter. That is the contradiction of the embalmer's job. The work protected the dead, served the family, and fit the religion. It also violated the body. Many societies created similar outsiders: grave diggers, executioners, corpse carriers, butchers. They handled what everyone depended on and what everyone feared becoming. By this point, the grossest jobs are no longer just about bad smells. They are about contact. Contact with waste. Contact with rot. Contact with death. But there is one more layer, and it may be the darkest, because some ancient jobs were disgusting not because they touched decay, but because they treated living bodies as consumable. Mining was like that. At Lorient, near Athens, silver helped fund one of the most famous city-states in history. The Athenian fleet, the coins, the public wealth, all of it was tied to metal pulled from the earth. But the workers, many of them enslaved, faced narrow shafts, heat, dust, darkness, bad air, and collapse. In some ancient mines, small bodies were useful because tight spaces rewarded them, which means children could be dragged into the machinery of extraction. Diodorus Siculus, describing gold mines in Egypt and Nubia, wrote of laborers driven under brutal conditions, chained, exhausted, and given no mercy. The filth here was not sewage. It was rock dust in the lungs, sweat in the dark, toxic metal, and a life spent making shiny things for people who would never see the tunnel. Lead, silver, copper, and gold made pipes, coins, weapons, jewelry, roofs, statues, and states. The ancient world glittered because other people were buried in the process of making it glitter. So what was the most disgusting job in ancient history? The honest answer is that disgust had categories. The fuller worked in urine. The tanner worked in rotting skin and dung. The sewer cleaner entered the city's intestines. The purple dyer managed decomposing shellfish for the clothing of elites. The garum maker turned fish guts into luxury flavor. The embalmer crossed into death. The miner entered a place where the human body was spent like fuel. But the bigger discovery is that none of these jobs were weird exceptions. They were the hidden operating system of civilization. Cities concentrate people, and people concentrate waste. More people means more food scraps, more excrement, more animals, more laundry, more dead bodies, more demand for shoes, vessels, dyes, sauces, metals, and status objects. The visible ancient city had temples, markets, baths, statues, processions, and polished stone. The invisible city had pits, vats, drains, slaughter yards, dumps, furnaces, and workshops where the smell told the truth. One could not exist without the other. And that is why this is not just a story about ancient people being filthy. In some ways, they were more honest about the bargain than we are. We still have the jobs. Wastewater workers still maintain the systems that make a flush feel effortless. Tanning still happens. Meat processing still happens. Mining still happens. Death care still happens. Trash still disappears because someone moves it. The difference is distance. Pipes, trucks, zoning laws, industrial parks, global supply chains, and sealed packaging move the unpleasant part farther from your senses. Your clean shirt, your leather shoes, your phone battery, your paved street, your bathroom, even the fact that your garbage vanishes overnight, all of it depends on people and systems standing between comfort and contact. So go back to that Roman street before sunrise, the urine jars by the wall, the wet hides in the yard, the fish vats near the coast, the purple shells crushed by the shore, the drain cover with warm air rising through it. At first, it looks like a less advanced world because you can smell everything, but maybe the smell is the clue. Ancient life made visible what modern life works very hard to hide. Civilization has always had a backstage, and for most of human history, the people working there were standing ankle deep in the truth.